Hi, my name's Rebecca Jones, and I'm absolutely honored that I was asked to come and talk with you virtually on your staff forum day about strategic thinking. And I'm also thinking when you heard that, some of you thought, really? Strategic thinking? Some of you may think it's boring. Some of you may think it's just for senior management to do, or that it's possibly only done when you're doing strategic planning about every 4 years. Yeah, no, that's not the case. In fact, strategic thinking is really something that we in the library and information world everywhere really needs to be exercising regularly. Now, don't panic here about the word exercise. It's something that we are so well equipped for. When people say we don't see the big picture, I say to them, we have all the makings, the competencies for seeing the big picture. It requires learning. It requires deep curiosity, which we in the library and information sector definitely have. That's why we're here. And it requires courage. And we're going to talk about all three of those. But lastly, it's something that we do together and that you do together because it has to be collaborative. No one person can do all the strategic thinking on their own. So here we go. Grab your water bottles, get ready to do your stretches, and let's get to it. Strategic thinking is all about, I could say, thinking strategically. That's kind of obvious. What is thinking strategically? It is not, as I said, just for senior management, and it's certainly not just for strategic planning. In fact, we make strategic decisions every day in every aspect of our operational tasks and tactics. And so thinking strategically is understanding the bigger environment that's not only impacting the library, but most importantly, impacting the people, the organizations, the community, the companies, the council, the town that we serve. In fact, not only that we serve, but that we have a passion to change the lives of. That's what public libraries are all about. So we can own this, and in fact, I think in some ways we do. We don't give ourselves enough credit for what we actually can and do accomplish as strategic thinkers. So why should we want to own this? This is exactly why we should want to own this. Because strategic thinking is about understanding, doing the detective work. We're detectives, right? Isn't that what librarians and library staff do? Yes. We understand, we dig into things to understand it and to understand the relationships, the trends, maybe the non-trends, the various factors that are coming along that impact the people of Caledon and the organizations of Caledon, the taxpayers of Caledon, which goes way beyond the taxpayers in Ontario, because Caledon's in Ontario, in Canada, in North America, in the world. All of that has a ripple effect right down to the town. And I love the fact that you are on the front page of the town's website. Great results start with great questions. And thinking is at the basis, right, of every question. And great questions start with learning, curiosity, and courage. Those are the three fundamentals of strategic thinking. So this is the only theoretical part of this talk with you. It's about one of my favorite authors and who is very active, who is at McGill, Professor Henry Mintzberg. He's in Harvard Business Review, he's written lots, but the best part about Henry is that he is very practical. And he's written a great deal about strategic planning, which is why I have started following him 35 plus years ago. But he talks a great deal about strategic thinking. And I took one of his famous essays about strategic thinking, which again is very practical. The man has worked in organizations and understands what it is. He doesn't just talk from the academic lectern. But this is the word cloud that came out. And isn't it fascinating that in this word cloud, assumptions comes up in terms of strategic thinking. Creativity and creative approaches comes up. New, things that are new. What is it that's developing, that is influencing things that are happening? And how can we be creative, or how are those things being creative? And what actions are we going to take? There is no point in doing strategic thinking if we are not going to take action, if we're not going to make decisions. And that's what public libraries are all about, right? So the thing about strategic thinking is it doesn't just happen automatically. It is something that needs to be prompted. We need to prompt ourselves. We need to, in fact, in my work, provoke. People will say I'm very provoking. But we need to provoke our thinking about what's impacting Caledon, what's impacting the people, the businesses, as I said, small businesses, large organizations, social organizations, Board of Ed, in the next few years, today and in the next few years. All of a sudden, everybody's interested in this because we are, of course, in the middle of a crisis. But strategic thinking really should be happening all the time. And for us in the library sector, it should be part of our bread and butter. What are organizations similar to libraries in other sectors that we need to be watching, that we can learn from, that we can detect trends and factors from? What are those other organizations doing? We in libraries love to look at other libraries, and that's great. We learn from other libraries. We don't learn strategically from other libraries. We learn what's possible, perhaps, what's similar, what gives us ideas. It's other sectors that help us be strategic. And the last question here, what questions should we be asking? Questions are at the root of strategy and at the root of thinking. Think about it. If you think about it, I just had a question. So good strategic thinking, and I promise this is the end of the theory, raises the right questions clearly and precisely. There are some authors, some leaders that I have the greatest respect for who believe and who practice that it's more important to spend more time phrasing a question properly than answering it, because it's from the question that we will design our approach to get the answers and to get some solutions for it. Good strategic thinking focuses on the real problem or the decision that needs to be taken. For some people, as I said, they only do strategic thinking around strategic planning time. Well, what's the real problem that they're trying to solve? Sometimes the problem is they're trying to extend their services, when in fact the problem should be that they're looking at what is it that our community is facing that we need to be a part of solving for the community, not what the library's next move should be, but what those moves will be in terms of solving a community issue. It's about gathering and assessing relevant information. Information are us. It's about developing well-reasoned conclusions and solutions, testing them out against our criteria and our standards. People will accuse us of being very logical, correct? Why not? It's okay. We can also be very creative, because it's also about recognizing and assessing our own assumptions, the implications of those assumptions, and the consequences of the decisions that are to be taken. I promised that was the end of the theory, and it is. We are ready, and we are ready in the other way too, in that we are learners, we are curious. In fact, we are in a sector of curiosity. We work in a place based on curiosity, on being curious about what people need, the type of information that they need, the type of items that they like to read, they like to be entertained with, the jobs that they need to be done, whether it's building a fence and helping them find what they need on that, on finding out the bylaws to build a fence and helping them with that, on finding out the paper that they need to finish for school, the course that they're involved in, and how they need to find sources, resources, and a quiet study area. We are based on curiosity, and that in fact leads to the courage that we have, that I'm going to talk a lot about, and then of course collaboration. We wouldn't get anything done if it wasn't for our collaboration with each other, not just our cooperation, but our collaboration. So let's look at the muscles that we already have, and the muscles that or the stretches that we need to do, and a bit more muscle building on each of these. So let's start with the place that we are usually most comfortable, which is learning, because we are learners and we work in a place known for and that stands for lifelong learning. And indeed we are. We're constantly upgrading our skills. We're constantly learning new things about either the content that we're using. Now we're learning about how to do virtual services, extending those virtual services, how we're going to be working with people in a very different kind of environment. And that then goes with observing. So we work with the public and we are great observers. We're always watching for things, right? We are observers of people. We're interested in people. And we listen. We listen in all our engagements, all our interactions. We listen for what people are telling us and what they're not telling us, whether it's a child in story time or whether it's a partner that we're in an organization that we're cooperating with and dealing with. And we are readers. Some of us read more than others, but we are generally readers. So those areas we're pretty strong in. But there are areas that we need to strengthen our yoga muscles, if you like, or stretch our muscles a little bit more in the areas of learning. And one of the areas is in taking courses, especially because for many libraries we have courses that are free, even if they're general interest courses, but taking courses in things that we're not really usually interested in or that we've never thought of. For some people that's woodworking, working with their hands. You may work with things all the time on computers, but you may want to take something else. The reason that we take courses in things that we've never dealt with before is because it opens up our awareness. It opens up our thoughts about, wow, is that what that's really all about? Take a course on horticulture. Never thought I'd be interested in that. It's fascinating in terms of how that has implications for other things. It just stretches the mind a little bit. We also need to observe with intention what we take for granted or what we've never watched before. So observing traffic patterns, observing patterns in various neighborhoods, observing what is happening outside the library, not just in the environment outside, but not just observing in the library, observing how people interact. We constantly think about, people looking down at their phones. Well, what is it that's actually happening there? And how often do we see that? We also have to listen to people that we don't agree with. That is really hard, and that's a big part of learning, is listening to podcasts, listening to radio programs, television, whatever it is, YouTubes, speeches, listening to people at dinner parties, at conferences that we go to. You may say, well, we're not doing those things right now, but you are Zooming a lot. You are interacting with people. And so listening to people that drive you crazy, because it's from those people that we learn so much. I will purposely, my husband thinks I'm crazy, I will purposely seek out somebody at a dinner party or whatever, even now on the street, as I'm walking the dog, to talk with them about things that I know we are on different planes about, if you like. And it helps me to understand what they're really thinking and what's driving their thinking. There's another author that I've been following, an FS blog, which I highly recommend, which is written by a former employee of CSIS and who has hired 3 women that are investigative reporters, etc. They look at how people think, at various mental models, at decision making. You may think, oh my God, how esoteric is that? Well, you know what? It really informs me. But they are the ones who got me into reading 25 pages a day, 4 days a week. Because if we read 25 pages a day, 4 days a week, That's about 2 hours out of our life. We can do it. We can do it. That's 100 pages a week. It's 400 pages a month in things that we would not normally read. So in papers that I wouldn't read, in blog posts that I wouldn't normally read, in articles, you know, the Atlantic, the whatever, that I happen across, and I think I'm not really interested in that. But it is fascinating to see what people are talking about, and it certainly informs my thinking. And I divide and conquer this with my colleagues, and I encourage you to do the same. You don't have to take this all on yourself. That's why we have as the fourth quadrant of this is the collaboration. But that's how we learn. That's how we stretch our learning muscles. Which then takes me to curiosity. Because underpinning learning is that we are curious. So again, we are really good at asking questions, right? That's what we're trained to do, is to ask questions about what is it that you need? What is it that you're going to be doing with that? We need to reframe those questions a little bit and ask, what's driving that? What if this happened? Why is that? It's sort of the reference interview of life, if you like, the reference interview of our work. And to be our own reader's advisory, which goes back to the learning part. What should we be looking at that's totally different? And curiosity is one of the areas that we need to, in fact, have a little bit of weight training in this area to build some different muscles around it. And that's because we need to be curious about what our own personal and sectoral public library sector biases and assumptions are. We definitely have assumptions. And when we get together virtually, I hope that we can talk about some of those, because we need to question them. We need to get at what our own biases are that help us, or in fact, maybe don't help us, but that frame how we look at things. It is how we frame situations that help us, or not help us, as I said, but that lead us to certain conclusions, right? Our assumptions from our education, from our experiences in life, not just in work, frame our perceptions that we look through which we see trends, we see and judge a situation and judge how things are developing. Our assumptions frame our judgments, and we must be curious enough to park our judgments. Leave them in the parking lot for a little while, and that will come back then again to the collaboration, because we need to have others challenging our assumptions. The questions we ask right off the bat very often determine, of course, the answers that we get, right? Great results begin with great questions. If we ask the same questions, we will get the same results. Definition of insanity: doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. That's not mine, that's Rita Mae Brown, by the way. In practicing our strategic thinking muscles, we cannot accept the first frame or the first question that pops into our mind. We have to reframe, put our glasses on a little bit differently so that we look at the world differently. So let's look at what happens when we have the same frame all the time. As you can tell, this is a really old video, and some of you may be very familiar with it, some of you may not. And if you've seen it before, just go along with it and watch it again and see what happens. If you haven't seen it before, it's a really good demonstration of how we are influenced by our current frame.
By Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris, and is copyrighted.
Did you see the gorilla? I have to admit, I was one of the ones who did not see the gorilla, and it really shook me at the time. I thought, wow, where am I not seeing gorillas in my work, in our company, in our library? There are about 20% of the people usually see the gorilla, and that's the way it is in life. 80% of us don't, and what are we missing? We have to be really curious about our own frames, about our own assumptions, about the assumptions that we are making in designing our services, in the processes that we're putting in place, in the practices that we're putting in place, even with virtual services. And we have to identify parallels with other situations. So, like with the gorilla, where have I missed a gorilla before? Or how is this situation in retail or with artificial intelligence in manufacturing? How is that situation similar or going to be similar with city practices in Parks and Rec, and then with us? We have to look at that type of thing, and that is what then leads to and has us call on our courage. We work in public institutions. We are courageous. We are courageous in how we go out every day, whether it's virtually or in person with the public. And we are courageous in always taking a chance in the services that we do, the creativity that we show, the risks that we take in trying different things. We are courageous. It takes a different type of courage to analyze the implications of trends and developments with artificial intelligence, with budgets, with the public aversion to various spaces and physical places. We have to have real courage to look at these implications. We have to have courage to look at what is happening with our suppliers, what is particularly happening with publishers, not only the cost, but also the embargoes, and what the implications are of that for us in libraries, and most importantly, for our communities and our residents and our businesses. And it takes real courage to focus on those few things that are really distinctive and unique for the library and that we do exceptionally well, better than anybody else, and to divest ourselves of other things that we don't do quite as well. That takes real courage. I am sure that you have tried to divest or phase out various types of services, or types of programs, types of collections, and had to deal with the backlash of that. It wouldn't matter what. If you walk on water, somebody else is going to say that you splashed them. That takes courage. It takes courage in strategic planning, in fact, to do what's called a SWOT really well. A SWOT is looking at what an organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are, and from there looking at what the strategic options are for the organization. Most organizations, including a lot of libraries, do not do SWOTs really well, because to do a SWOT really well takes a lot of courage, especially with boards, to be able to step up and look at what is actually happening in the environment that is going to undermine us. And we start there. We start from the outside in. That's where the courage comes from. Because then we look at those very few things in that emerging environment in which we know, for instance, Canada's economy is going to be very tense. The Ontario economy is going to be very tense. We need to be stretching our strategic thinking, doing the types of learning, observing, curiosity, and now into the courage, looking at those few opportunities. And it's only then that we go up this way, we go across here to look at what our weaknesses are. In that emerging environment, what in fact are our weaknesses? For some libraries, they are looking at the fact that their physical business buildings, which have always been the beacon of the community, in fact right now may be a weakness in the emerging environment. I don't know if it is or not. It's a question we need to have the courage to ask. And finally, we get to those few strengths that we have. What do we excel at that matters in this emerging environment? This kind of SWOT takes great courage. It is the strategic thinking that informs these types of strategic options. Here we go, right? We can only judge what our few strengths and weaknesses are in the context of the greater environment, which we only know about from looking, observing, learning, being curious about what is happening in the world around us that is impacting inside Caledon. takes courage to question our status quo. Like it or not, our tendency is to perpetuate what we already know, right? We always say the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know, but we are leaving the status quo every day. We leave the status quo. It's not just the coronavirus. Every day, something is changing in the world, in the immediate environment around Caledon. Self-driving cars are closer than we think. To question the status quo is psychologically risky, and this is where the courage comes in. Breaking from status quo means taking action, and when we take action, we take responsibility, thus opening up ourselves to criticism and to regret. And we in public service know we are always open to criticism. We shouldn't be open to regret. Well, phew, with all that learning you have to do, with all that curiosity and the courage you need to take on, it's a good thing we're not in this alone. And we are not in this alone. You have each other, and we have each other through the library sector to do this together. In organizations, I always encourage people to divide and conquer. You don't have to go at this alone. Your library, all public libraries, must be deeply local. Dr. Matt Finch is a good friend. He is not a librarian. He is a strategic practitioner. He works a great deal in the GLAM sector, which is galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And he works a lot with governments, especially Australia and the UK and Europe. He's actually based in the UK. He was here last June and did a library scenario planning workshop with us for a full 2 days. It was fabulous. In fact, when I come virtually, if you want to talk a little bit about it, that would be terrific. And he, when I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, because we talk, and so I did a podcast with him, and we talked about in his experience, because he's working with library organizations in Australia right now, helping them do the reset that they need to do. And I said, so what's the most important mapping that we should be doing? Because we always look at mind mapping, power mapping, influence mapping. He said it's actually the relationship mapping, the relationships that we've had, what's in those relationships for us now in this emerging environment, and what's in the relationship for our partners, for our collaborators, for our counselors, for our funders in this emerging environment. So I've done a very simple little mind map here for you of Caledon and of mapping those influencers that you need to be looking at, that you need to be understanding what's impacting their world, what their aspirations are, what their challenges are in this environment, and the factors that then start pushing on them and pulling on them. Because together with them and with each other in the library, you need to deepen your understanding of Caledon now and Caledon as it's moving forward day by day, as the opening up comes, as perhaps the closing down comes, and the world around us. We, as I said at the beginning of learning, we are all about lifelong learning. And I hope I've prompted a bit of interest for you in strategic thinking. It's not that hard, and it's so interesting. It's so interesting. It's our thinking that builds up our knowledge over time. It's our knowledge that builds our actions. The more that we learn, the more curious we are, both about what's around us and about ourselves, and having the courage to question our own assumptions and to question some of the assumptions of our sector. It takes time. That investment definitely pays off, like any investment pays off over time. And it is those skills and it is that wherewithal to do that that fuels public libraries and will continue to fuel public libraries. Public libraries are here because of the strategic thinking of over 100 years ago that looked at, we need to be educating people to build this country, to build our corporations, to build our organizations. And it cost money in those days for people to go to school. I am old enough that my father was pulled out of school as the oldest boy in grade 8 because it cost money to go to high school in Ontario, and that was not possible for him. We can't think through these things by ourselves. We can't think through these things or make connections or decisions alone or in a vacuum. The conditions, the connections, the implications, the decisions, the problems, the incredible opportunities that we face are increasingly complex. They're not just complicated, they're complex. We need to be working with each other in our libraries and beyond our libraries, in other organizations that bring us other types of thinking, and looking and learning through courses, through readings, through people we can't stand listening to. What is it about them that is driving us crazy, that is making us question our own assumptions? It's hard, and it's incredibly stimulating. This is why we came into libraries in the first place, right? It's what our mission is all about as public libraries, and it's worth it because it's about our communities. The better we are, the better our communities are. I can't wait to be there with you virtually. I'd rather be there with you in person, even with a mask and a face guard on, I don't care. I hope this has prompted your thinking about even taking another course. And I can't wait to talk with you. Thanks so much for getting through this. Bye.